I want you to picture something for a second.
Yeah.
Um, Imagine you are traveling entirely alone.
Right, the absolute worst case scenario.
Exactly. It is the dead of night, and you are navigating your way through this ancient, vast, pitch-black desert. There are no city lights on the horizon. There's no hum of highway traffic.
Just you, the biting wind, and an ocean of sand.
Yeah, and the temperature has plummeted like it always does in the desert after the sun goes down. But then cutting through that heavy silence, you hear it.
The sound of the woman.
Yes, the sound of a woman crying in the distance. She sounds lost, she sounds incredibly vulnerable, and she is begging for help. So what do? Do you go out into the dark to help her? Or do you trust your gut and run the other way as fast as you can?
Well, it is the ultimate dilemma, and depending on where and when you live, the answer to that question could literally mean the difference between life and a very, very gruesome death.
Which is actually the perfect jumping off point for today's deep dive. We are exploring the ancient mythological desert.
Yes, looking at a really fascinating stack of sources today.
We are. Specifically, we're looking at a highly detailed visual bestiary of Arabic mythological creatures. It is essentially a survival guide to a world where the dark is actively trying to kill you.
It's a terrifying read.
Our mission today is to zero in on a horrifying trio of graveyard monsters from this chart, and then eventually unpack the psychology behind one very specific deadly predator known as the Sala, or, depending on the region, the Salua.
And the goal today isn't just to sit around a metaphorical campfire and trade ghost stories. What we're really doing is decoding these ancient myths to, understand the psychology of the people who created them.
Because what a society fears tells you so much about them.
Exactly. When you look closely at the monsters a society invents, you learn everything about their daily survival. You see their fear of the unknown, their physical vulnerability, and the real dangers of the desert landscape they inhabited.
It's just a fascinating lens to look through. I mean, let's start wide, because when you examine the broader canvas of this chart of Arabic mythological creatures, it feels like peering into an entirely different dimension.
It really is a wildly diverse array of beings.
Yeah, you've got creatures with names like Al-Qutrub, Al-Nimnim, and Abu al-Salasil. And that last one actually translates to Father of Chains, which immediately paints a terrifying picture.
Great. It introduces this profoundly unsettling auditory element to the mythology. I mean, if you're out in the quiet dunes, miles from civilization, the last thing you want to imagine is the metallic, rhythmic clanking of dragging chains moving through the dark.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it plays right into the sensory deprivation of the desert. And then there's Haimar al-Koila. When you look at all of these together, you realize it's not just a random collection of isolated monsters.
No, it's a fully functioning ecosystem.
Exactly. It's this whole ecosystem of Jinn, demons, shapeshifters. It is an entire populated world of nightmares operating just beyond the firelight.
Well, the ancient Bedouin tribes and early Arabs, they didn't view desolate spaces as empty. The deep deserts, the wadis, the abandoned ruins, they believed those territories were fully inhabited, just not by humans.
The desert wasn't a void.
Right. It was an occupied nation belonging to these unseen entities. And if you trespassed without knowing the rules, you were stepping directly into their food chain.
So let's step into one of those territories right now. Imagine a moonlit graveyard on the outskirts of an ancient settlement.
Basically, the ultimate worst-case scenario for a nighttime stroll.
Right. And it's the perfect habitat for two specific brutes we need to talk about before we get to the Sela. First up is Al-Ghul.
Al-Ghul, or the Ghoul. Culturally, this is the apex predator of the graveyard. It's described in the sources as this massive, incredibly ugly, flesh-eating monster that famously haunts burial sites to consume the dead.
But it wasn't just confined to the cemetery, right?
No, not at all. Arabs in pre-Islamic times were so genuinely terrified of the ghoul that it impacted their physical economy. Travelers and merchants would actively alter their routes or delay journeys out of fear of running into one in the wilderness.
Wait, really? It was viewed as a legitimate travel hazard.
Absolutely. It was a recognized physical threat to commerce.
I love that idea. It's like checking the local weather report, but instead of avoiding a thunderstorm, you're avoiding a flesh-eating giant. You can just imagine a merchant saying, I think we'll delay the caravan to Damascus until Tuesday. There's a high probability of ghouls on the main trade route.
It sounds absurd to a modern ear, sure, but the terror was absolutely genuine. And sharing that exact same graveyard habitat with the ghoul is Al-Qutrub.
The werewolf of the Jinn.
Exactly. It's a restless creature that just loves to linger near corpses.
But there's this bizarrely specific detail about Al-Qutrub from the sources that really caught my eye. The folklore insists that Alcatrib never stays in one place for more than an hour.
Right, which is an oddly rigid rule for a mythical werewolf.
That's what I thought. Like, he's got a strict schedule to keep. He's on a parking meter in the graveyard. It just seems like such an arbitrary logistical limitation for an ancient monster.
Why put a time limit on a supernatural threat, right?
Well, I started thinking about the physical reality of walking past a cemetery at night. You're terrified, your adrenaline is pumping, you see a shadow move in the corner of your eye, maybe cast by a cloud passing over the moon. You freeze.
But when you turn to look,
The shadow is gone. Boom. The 1 hour rule explains it perfectly to an ancient mind. Oh, he must have just moved on, his hour was up. It validates the terror without requiring permanent physical proof.
that is a brilliant way to frame it. It provides a rational framework for an entirely irrational fear. Humans love to give their monsters rules, even if those rules are strange, because it creates an illusion of control.
If you knew the creature's schedule, you feel a tiny bit safer.
Exactly. It makes the world predictable. But that desire for predictability perfectly sets us up for the third creature in that graveyard, the one that demands our complete, undivided attention today.
Because while the ghoul and alcatrobe represent the fear of physical brutality,
Right, and the creeping dead, this third creature represents a far more insidious psychological type of terror, the Selloa.
the Sala, or the female ghoul as she's sometimes called, she is this ancient entity intrinsically tied to the desert, to deception, and specifically to the hunting of lost, isolated men.
And her origins are actually heavily debated in the old folklore. There is no clear consensus in the sources on what exactly she is. Is she a rebellious Jinn? Is she a human-monster hybrid?
Or just a pure demonic entity. The stories vary quite a bit depending on the region.
They do, but they all anchor on one terrifying baseline fact. She is fundamentally not human.
And that ambiguity is intentional, isn't it?
It is, and it significantly amplifies the fear. When an entity lacks a neat biological category, it means it operates entirely outside the boundaries of the natural world. You can't outsmart something if you don't even know what kingdom of nature it belongs to.
Let's pull back the curtain and look at what she actually looks like when she drops the disguise. Because the descriptions of her true form are incredibly vivid and deeply horrifying.
Oh, they are nightmare fuel.
We are talking about sharp, pronounced fangs protruding from the mouth, glowing eyes that pierce through the dark, animalistic feet, ridiculously long claws.
And a body completely covered in coarse hair, often compared to a primate.
Yeah, and the hybrid nature gets even weirder. Some regional tales give her the legs of the donkey or the hooves of a goat. It reads like a chaotic collage of different animalistic traits.
She represents a total breakdown of natural order.
And her face is described as this deformed hybrid sitting squarely in the deepest part of the uncanny valley. She hovers somewhere between a recognizable human woman.
And a totally wild, unthinking beast.
It evokes that visceral feeling when your brain looks at something and your internal alarm bells just start screaming, something is fundamentally wrong here.
Yet her true terror, the reason she is arguably the most feared predator in this entire mythology, isn't that physical form, it's her tactical approach.
Her ultimate weapon.
Exactly. Fatal seduction. She doesn't wander the dunes looking like a hairy, goat-legged monster. She possesses the supernatural ability to completely alter her shape into a human woman of stunning, flawless beauty.
I was trying to wrap my head around how she operates in practice, and the best natural analogy I could come up with is the anglerfish. You know those terrifying prehistoric-looking fish down at the bottom of the ocean?
Oh, in the pitch black water, where they use a bioluminescent glowing antenna hanging over their jaws.
Yes. The anglerfish lives in total darkness and sensory deprivation, just like the nighttime desert. It uses this beautiful glowing light to lure in smaller prey.
They are hypnotized by the glow.
Right. They swim right up to it, feeling totally safe, maybe even curious, and then wham, these massive needle-like teeth snap shut out of the shadows. The Sally utilizes the exact same predatory mechanism, but her glowing lure isn't a bulb. Her lure is human empathy and physical attraction.
That is a terrifyingly accurate comparison. She weaponizes our best, most pro-social instincts against us. Think about it. If she just attacked her victim in her monstrous form, a traveler's fight-or-flight response would kick in.
He would draw a sword or run.
Right. But by presenting herself as a vulnerable person in desperate need of assistance, she disarms her prey entirely. She bypasses all the travelers' defensive walls without throwing a single punch.
It's psychological warfare.
Yeah.
So what does this trap actually look like in the wild? Where is she setting up this lure? The lure points to some very specific hunting grounds.
Caves, the edges of graveyards, desolate ruins.
And the very fringes of rural villages. And she always strikes after dark.
Because darkness is essential to the illusion. It obscures the subtle imperfections in her disguise. It hides the goat hooves under the hem of a dress or the unnatural glow in her eyes.
There is a classic folklore scenario from the text that perfectly encapsulates her method. It's a famous tale, often referred to as The Lost Traveler. Let's walk through it because the pacing of the terror is brilliant.
It really is.
Imagine that lone man traveling the desert at night we talked about at the very beginning. He has been walking for hours. He is physically exhausted, mentally on edge, and the isolation is playing tricks on his mind.
And suddenly he hears a soft weeping.
He follows the sound and finds a woman. She is breathtakingly beautiful, but she appears weak, distressed, and she is crying out for help. She tells him she was separated from her caravan and begs for an escort to safety.
And this is where the trap snaps shut. The man, whether motivated by a desire to be a hero, a spark of romantic attraction, or just basic human decency, agrees to help her.
He offers his protection.
Right. He walks with her, moving further away from the main path until they reach an isolated spot, perhaps a rocky outcrop or an abandoned ruin.
He thinks he is in control. He thinks he is performing a noble deed.
Then comes the turn. The psychological horror peaks right here. The illusion shatters. The stories describe this moment with chilling precision. Her soft voice suddenly drops, becoming deep and guttural. Her eyes shift, turning animalistic and beginning to glow. And before the man's brain can even process the betrayal, the fangs and the long claws emerge. The beautiful, vulnerable woman melts away instantly, and the apex predator is right on top of him.
It is the ultimate betrayal of trust. You reach out to save someone, and they devour you. So how do these encounters usually end? Does the traveler ever make it out alive?
That entirely depends on the era and the specific version of the story. In many of the older, purely survivalist versions of the myth, the man simply vanishes forever. He is consumed, and he becomes just another cautionary statistic.
Another reason not to travel at night.
Exactly. But in other versions, particularly as the culture evolved and religion became more deeply ingrained in daily life, the man survives. But he doesn't survive by fighting her off with his sword.
How does he do it?
He survives by remembering God, or by frantically reciting specific Quranic verses just before she strikes.
Which completely shifts the meaning of the entire myth. It stops being just a monster story.
Precisely. It reveals the creature's dual purpose in the society. On a base level, yes, it is a straightforward horror story meant to keep people alert. But on a deeper level, it functions as a religious and moral cautionary tale.
A test of faith.
The Sala becomes a literal test of faith. If you succumb entirely to earthly temptations like physical beauty, the desire for isolation with a stranger, or the arrogance of playing the savior, you will be destroyed. But if you maintain your spiritual grounding, you pierce the deception and survive.
It's an entire morality play disguised as a creature feature. And we should note, she isn't just a one-trick pony. Seduction is her primary weapon, but the lore highlights a terrifying arsenal of other abilities.
She's very versatile.
Yeah, she utilizes mental deception, meaning she can literally confuse her victim's mind, making them lose their sense of direction so they wander in circles, unable to escape. She possesses unnatural speed.
She can fade seamlessly into the shadows.
And in some of the really old, visceral stories, she doesn't just eat flesh, she drinks the blood of her victims.
She is a highly adapted apex predator of the psychological landscape, which makes it incredibly revealing to compare directly to her peers in the bestiary.
Let's do that monster matchup. If you put the Sala side by side with her male counterpart, the Ghoul, it is complete contrast in predatory styles.
Night and day. The Ghoul is almost universally depicted as male. His entire methodology relies on brute strength and blunt force trauma. He is enormous, he is inherently violent, and he ambushes traveling groups.
He's just a tank.
Right. He might disguise himself as an animal or hide behind a dune, but the end goal is always a physical, overwhelming attack.
Then you look at the Sala, almost exclusively female. She completely abandons brute strength in favor of seduction, beauty, and emotional manipulation. And unlike the Ghoul who attacks caravans, she specifically isolates and targets individual men.
It's a very specific hunting pattern.
Which begs an obvious question about the people telling these stories. Why is the female monster consistently the seductive trickster, while the male monster is just the big, dumb brute. Doesn't this just map directly onto ancient, fairly problematic gender stereotypes?
It absolutely does, and it's impossible to ignore that cultural context. These myths were generated and passed down by deeply patriarchal societies. In those societal structures, overt physical strength and public authority were the exclusive domains of men.
Therefore, the male monsters reflected that overt physical threat.
Exactly. Women, lacking the same physical dominance or societal authority in those ancient cultures, were often viewed with a different, more insidious kind of suspicion. The cultural anxiety was that women wielded a hidden power through manipulation, emotion, and sexuality.
The Sala is the literal, monstrous embodiment of that specific patriarchal fear. She represents the ancient, deeply rooted terror of a woman who can outsmart and emotionally manipulate a man to his ruin.
And that fear isn't isolated to the Arabian Peninsula. The mechanics of the Scylla connect her to a vast network of global mythology.
She really is in very famous company. I mean, you could see the direct parallels to the sirens of Greek mythology. Those were the murderous entities, often depicted as mermaids or birdwomen, who lured sailors to crash their ships on the rocky shores using their impossibly beautiful singing voices.
A very similar trap.
Yeah. You also see elements of vampires, with the mesmerizing seduction followed by blood drinking, and of course the werewolf connection, with the terrifying transformation from human to beast under the moonlight.
The underlying psychological mechanism is strikingly universal. Human beings everywhere, across entirely different continents and eras, seem to harbor a deep-seated, instinctual fear of being lured to our deaths by something highly attractive.
We fear our own desires being used as bait.
Exactly. However, even with those global cousins, we have to emphasize that the Scylla is a distinctly Arab creation. She is uniquely adapted to her environment.
The sirens use the ocean to isolate their prey.
Right, but the Scylla uses the vast, unforgiving ocean of sand. She's born directly out of the harsh reality of Bedouin life.
She wouldn't make any sense in a lush European forest or a snowy mountain range. Her entire existence relies on the specific isolation of the desert dunes. So let's do a quick reality check here just to clear the air.
Always a good idea.
I know it sounds silly, but for anyone planning a camping trip in the Sahara, is there any historical reality to her? Do I need to be worried about a hairy, shape-shifting goat woman asking me for directions?
The historical records and our understanding of the natural world confirm unequivocally no. She is pure folklore. There is zero empirical evidence of her existence outside of the cultural imagination.
Well, that's a relief.
Yeah.
But if she is entirely fictional, why invent her? People don't just invent monsters this complex out of thin air because they had a bad dream.
They are engineered for a reason.
Let's decode the symbolism, because the lore provides some fantastic cultural cryptography. We can break down exactly what each piece of her represents.
It maps out perfectly. First, she operates almost exclusively in the night. In this mythology, the night universally symbolizes the unknown. It is the time when human vision is limited, when the temperature drops, and when our physical vulnerability is at its absolute peak.
That makes perfect sense. Then there is the element of her false beauty.
The false beauty symbolizes deception. It is the hard-learned lesson that surface appearances can be lethal, and that blindly trusting what your eyes see without engaging your critical thinking can get you killed.
And when the illusion drops, her brutality, the sudden appearance of the fangs, the long claws, the coarse hair.
That brutality represents the hidden, ever-present dangers of the desert itself. A desert landscape can look beautiful, serene, and completely empty at a glance. But just beneath the surface of the sand, it is teeming with venomous scorpions, aggressive vipers, hidden sinkholes.
And the lethal, silent threat of dehydration.
The brutality is always there, hiding just out of sight.
And finally, her primary weapon, the seduction itself.
Her seduction represents the complete loss of wisdom. When the weary traveler lets down his guard because he is attracted to her, or because his ego demands he play the brave savior, he abandons his rationality.
He stops thinking logically and starts acting purely on emotion.
And in a harsh survival situation like the deep desert, surrendering your rationality is fatal.
Ancient Arabs created her out of genuine hyper-practical fears. Traveling the desert at night was essentially a death sentence. There were real threats out there, rival tribes, desperate bandits, wild animals.
The fear of strangers in the dark was a completely valid survival instinct.
And, perhaps on the most practical level of all, She was a terrifying boogeyman designed by parents and elders to enforce rules.
Oh, definitely. It was a way to scare children and perhaps overconfident, foolish young men into staying close to the safety of the campfire.
Like, don't wander off into the dark alone, or the Sala will trick you and eat you.
It is a highly effective method of ancient crowd control.
So what does this all mean for us today? What is the overarching, enduring message of the Sala? There's a phrase from the text that summarizes the core of this myth perfectly. Not everything beautiful is safe.
It's a timeless warning.
I think this deep dive proves that monsters are rarely just monsters. They are cultural mirrors. They reflect a society's deepest anxieties, their specific vulnerabilities, and the strict rules they need to enforce just to keep their people alive.
I completely agree. And I'd like to leave you, our listener, with a final, slightly unsettling thought to mull over today.
Okay, I like where this is going.
We've spent this entire time dissecting an ancient myth born in the sand, and it's true, we don't have to worry about hairy, shape-shifting demons with goat legs hiding in physical ruins anymore. But think about the core operational concept of the Sala.
A predator in disguise.
Exactly. We are talking about an entity that wears a beautiful, completely fabricated disguise. It preys specifically on your empathy, your loneliness, or your physical attraction. It lures you into an isolated space where your friends can't protect you, and then it destroys you.
Wait, are you talking about the internet?
I am. The conceptual mechanism of the Sala is arguably more alive and active today than it ever was in antiquity. Think about the epidemic of digital catfishing.
Oh, wow.
Think about sophisticated romance scams or malicious actors hiding behind beautiful, flawlessly generated AI avatars on social media. They don't want your flesh, but they want your bank account, your data, or your emotional security.
They use your innate human desire for connection to lure you into a trap.
Exactly. The terrain changed from an ocean of sand to an ocean of servers, but the predatory tactic is exactly the same.
That is incredibly chilling, but so true.
The desert has evolved into a digital landscape, but make no mistake, the Sala is still out there, and she is still hunting.
Well, on that terrifying but deeply fascinating note, we want to thank you for coming along on this deep dive with us today. The next time you see a profile or a message that seems just a little too perfect in your feed, maybe take a second look before you wander into the dark.
We warmly invite you to keep questioning the world around you and wonder what other ancient monsters might just be the beta versions of today's digital dangers.
Until next time.